Film. Hello, good people of the IFC Center. My name is Charles Bromesco. I'm a critic living here in New York, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to you one of the people instrumental in smuggling the filth that just befouled this heretofore reputable theater. Please welcome the head of Drafthouse Films, founder, head honcho, Tim League. So the first thing I want to ask about is, I guess, a little selfish, a little personal, about the sort of legal fallout of this film. I know Tinto Brass is not happy about this. He's not pleased.
I mean, I don't, in the wake of this film, nobody's pleased, really. Like, Tinto Brass is one of the least of the casualties in a weird way. It's like, everybody associated with the film when it came out in 1980 disowned it, right? And so it's an original script by Gore Vidal, the legendary Gore Vidal. He's like had wanted nothing to do with this film. Even the composer used a pseudonym. Just didn't want. It was toxic before toxic was such a word.
The credits really tell a story where it's adapted from the screenplay by Gore Vidal.
I know. Everybody's sort of scrambling for a title on this. So Thomas, who was originally listed as a producer of this film, he's the one that kind of put it all together. And he's, what is he now? He's a Reconstructionist, I believe is his official role. So he basically took the 100 or so hours of raw camera negative that were the remains of Caligula after really everybody creatively was disgusted and just said goodbye to this film. But all this good footage was there. And so he made his best effort to go back to the Gore Vidal script, even though I just found this out. Like I've been saying that. He went back to the Gore Vidal script and he's like, oh no, Gore would have fucking hated this version. Because part of his big issue was that this is not the visual sense of what he had written, right? There was the fewer headbands and platform heels and 80s aesthetic that just that's what drove him mad, but then on top of that, the actual narrative structure of the 1980 version was lost. And so I think what Thomas was trying to do is get back to the narrative of what it was that Caligula was, and also brought the 1980 version had about 8 minutes of Helen Mirren, and this has 50 minutes of Helen Mirren. So it's a very different story.
That's a no-brainer. Yeah, you need more Helen Mirren. That's so I assume that you saw this at Cannes last year, where it premiered. Did you see it there for consideration? And I guess the question being, this is a tricky proposition, releasing a film like this. Yeah. What made you want to require it? What made you want to release it?
Well, I'd been in touch with Thomas early on, so when he was starting to tackle this project, and so I was aware of it very early on, and I have my own sort of personal relationship with the film in that, I was 10 years old when it came out theatrically, but I was in my teens when it had its heyday on pay cable in the 80s, and I saw it there, and I saw it for the wrong reasons. I saw it just to see boobies and such when you were like a 13-year-old boy. And I have no recollection other than being completely titillated.
That's how you know this is a different film. This is not great as wank material. It's very grim, very demanding film like that. I guess that's a matter of taste. I don't know. And so,
agree to disagree, but
do you see this as an easier sell or a more difficult sell than it was in the 1980s? It seems like in some ways sexual attitudes have become more permissive, in some ways they've become less permissive. It's been 40 years.
Well, in the 80s it was a curiosity piece, and it was an absurdity, and it was actually a huge success, and it was a hit, but it was not critically lauded at the time. So I mean, it's apples and elephants, really. It's what's fascinating about this project is that it's relatively unprecedented to have this level of a train wreck disaster of a film that at its bones has some like creative integrity that was never realized. And to have somebody like Malcolm McDowell, who credits this movie as absolutely tanking and destroying his potential of career.
He also says this is one of his finest performances.
It is, but he was very disappointed by when he actually entered a theater and saw what was Caligula in 1980, and he's very happy with where this is now, because it got so lazy and sloppy towards the end that what was interesting about the raw footage is that so I don't know if you know this, but like there's not a frame of this film that was in the original 1980 release, which is kind of it seems like a parlor trick, but they got to the point where it's like it turns out that the 17th editor that was in charge of putting together the 1980 version would basically just take the first take, right? And so there's like hairs in the gaze is slightly out of focus. It's like it's not necessarily the best performance, and so there was just a lot more there to play with. I think I've gone totally sideways on your question. Can't remember what it was.
No, it's all productive, all
Okay.
useful. It seems like, if you're down to talk technical specifics, that sound was one of the biggest obstacles, in that the original shooting in the studio in Italy, there was a lot of background noise, and they had to re-record dialogue, and they had to dub all these things. Was that a one of the more significant hurdles to clear in putting this back together?
What's kind of amazing about that is that it's only possible now, in that a lot of the sound was problematic, but they did have a lot of what you're hearing is from what wouldn't have been the recordings you would have taken in a feature film. They were just from the on-set recordings, but because there's been such advances in terms of isolation of sound and being able to pull out the actual raw dialogue from a messy recording, that sort of that technology, which is only a couple years old.
Is this AI stuff? Is this?
Yeah, I don't know. Like that's it's AI stuff, but yes, it is.
Look,
It is.
AI clearly can't be all bad if it was brought as Caligula, right?
Exactly. But it's that AI technology that allowed him to have a wider spectrum of available footage that he could use, and to have it kind of seamlessly come into a feature.
So in the 1980 release, the producer Bob Guccione would rent out entire theaters to specifically show Caligula all day. Releasing this, do you find that it requires you to think more tactically about who you're putting in front of, where you're putting it, than your average release?
Well, I mean, it's a different universe. I'm not Bob Guccione, but I don't know. I mean, it's he's such a strange character, right? Because he saw this opportunity. His vision was, even though Cleopatra had its own financial difficulties, he thought that Hollywood wasn't making movies like Cleopatra anymore, and he wanted. This is the most, up until that time, it may still stand as the most expensive independent film ever made, because borderline psychopath just like kept on funneling money into it, and it's lush, it's gorgeous, it's obviously expensive to make, and I think at the time in 1980 it sold, it worked, like because it was a spectacle, because it was obviously visually thrilling, it worked. This is not that release. We are to answer your question, we are being more strategic than Bob Guccione, and really it's about the saga and the story and the sort of the curiosity of what was then, the mistakes that were made, and trying to salvage something. It's just an incredibly unique film project that there's not really a parallel for.
Reconstruction on this level is pretty much unprecedented. I think in many ways this film is planted in its time and in its sense of extravagance and obscenity, but watching it I was also, it seems more current than it used to. I thought a lot about Trump, I thought a lot about
I thought a lot about Trump on this too.
Do you think the ages have been kind to this movie?
Have the ages been kind to any of us though? There's a new Caesar that's trying to capture the throne of the powerful country of the United States. I don't know. Yeah, it's timely in that we have an imbecile potentially claiming power over a great country, and the damage that can possibly do. I think there's a lot of parallels to yeah, it's a cautionary tale. Has everybody registered to vote, by the way? I just want to make sure you should probably, if you haven't, you should probably go do that. And very, very, very important election.
So working on a film at this scale, it feels kind of like almost, although as you say it was produced independently, one of the last vestiges of New Hollywood. Like you were saying, Bob Guccione was frustrated that they weren't making these big, layer cake epics anymore. Do you see that this is sort of, I feel like we have a dearth of this in Hollywood as well right now, like these big grand productions. Do you see this as sort of, yeah, I guess bringing us back to that time?
You always have to admire the big swings, right? But then there's the collateral damage of the misses on the big swings. And so I think we're actually technically blessed to be in a time where the means of production to get something that's of a high level of quality are more affordable, right? And so I don't necessarily advocate for somebody spending this level of dollars and then failing miserably. There's too many people out there that are trying to just find the storyline that independent film is dead, right? And that's a complete load of malarkey, right? And I think that we're in a time where you can have lush production values at a lower price, but then reinforcing the idea that it's truly incredible storytelling that is what brings people to this theater, to every theater, and why this is not a dead form, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like a rambling answer again. I'm kind of
no. These are all great answers. This is fantastic. I think the acting style in this movie clues us into a lot because it's very accented. In many ways, it's overstated, but it also has this extreme emotional immediacy, which kind of gets at the weird tonal balancing act of the movie, which is that it is opulent and it is meant to be gawked at and it's spectacular, but it's also kind of sickening. What is the key to that tightrope walk? How does a filmmaker balance those two really diametrically opposed things, pleasure and revulsion?
I think that I think Malcolm McDowell is perfect for it, right? Because he walks that line so well in this, and he obviously loves the grandness and the bigness and the over-the-topness, but he also kind of embraces the moments where he sees he's angry at himself and the absurdity of this situation.
The psychological shading on his characters is really fine, where it's like you see, I think it's so astute about the way rich and powerful people are, where he gets bored and then resentful and then frustrated with himself and the people around him, and it's just this horrible sort of like inward cycle. It's very much like Trump. Do you see this as like the psychology of it? I mean, I think that that's less discussed than sort of political dynamics, but do you see this as almost like a character piece?
A character piece. I suppose so. I mean, I feel it's like it is a tour de force for Malcolm, right? And I do think it's really poignant to have such an obvious parallel in Donald Trump. And there's the clear, it is a cautionary tale. This story, but it's so linked to Malcolm's outrageous performance. And there was a moment also in the production of this where Helen Mirren's character wasn't cast, and Helen Mirren was a noted stage actress, but not known for movies at the time, but was also a dear, close friend of Malcolm. And so he was the one that brought her into the production, basically to say, I need a buddy, I need a mate. This is a strange tightrope that I'm walking, and I need somebody that I can trust implicitly to understand. And so they did a lot of crafting of recreating of the script with Helen Mirren and Malcolm McDowell while on set.
Well, we've got time. We'd like to open it to the audience for a few questions. If there's so many things to ask about this film. Yeah, how about this gentleman right here, right there?
Thank you so much for your work on this cut. It was clearly a labor of love. I'm very curious, could you speak to the impetus for replacing the original score with something so 21st century sounding?
Just to repeat, that's asking about the impetus for replacing the score, the original score, with a more distinctly 21st century backing.
I can't necessarily, because I didn't make the decision to replace the score. I can say that so the composer for the original score also was somebody who took his name off the film. But it was also like, it was a moment to start afresh, right? Because it is a radically different movie with a lot of different scenes. And so the idea of cobbling together the score from that movie to make it fit within this one probably wasn't where Thomas wanted to go. It's ultimately Thomas' decision. But the idea of to go a more modern score versus more classical, I cannot answer that, unfortunately. But
there is, I caught only one shot where you can see that there are people playing music in the foreground, music that we are now not hearing. Anybody else got cues? Sure, right here.
Yeah, this is 3 hours long. The only time in the original movie, how does it compare to that one?
Well, that's the crazy thing about this movie, is that there's no necessarily original movie. There was like the pay cable version, but it varied state by state, right? Because one of the things that the actors were so pissed off about is that Bob Guccione decided, in kind of panic mode, I think, to introduce a lot of...
he capitulated to a lot of people.
Well, he introduced also a lot of porn into the movie. So he just like slapped in a bunch of pornography scenes. And so like the New York cut is very different from the Alabama cut, for example. There's probably about 30 different cuts of this movie. So what's the original? I mean, looking backwards, the whole thing was just like a bastardized cash grab with everybody creatively had left the project, and so it was cobbled together by God knows what army. And there are literally 25, 30 versions. So what's the original? I don't know.
I do believe if you go on IMDb, I think their number, wherever that comes from, is like 179 minutes, somewhere around there.
It might be the home entertainment.
Home entertainment. Yeah. We're going to take just one more from right here on the.
So one thing I noticed a lot, because I watched the original last week with my friend.
You did. I haven't gone back and watched it. I gotta put it on my list to do. How was it, by the way, before you ask your question?
Okay, so from the original to this one, the big difference is like all the different angles that work I saw, which really gave like great credit to the set designer. So you finally get to see the whole picture for once. And one thing I want to mention is like the shift of focus during the pornographic scenes, which in the original was very, very distracting.
Yeah. Because
it was boring, because you're just like, oh, they're trying to push plot, but you're just 10 minutes of them just fucking.
Boring to you, maybe.
But my question was, comes down to like how do you try to combine all the people who left the project? There's so many ways this project was pulled. So what was the idea when you finally saw the cut? It's like, oh, this is, I guess, the best version, like best compromise of their ideas.
So
the best part.
Just to restate, he was asking about with all the different cooks in the kitchen, how do you sort of unify that into one thing? How do you, whose vision are you even following there?
I mean, the first step was to familiarize with all, 100 hours of footage, right? To understand what was there, because because all we know is the old 1980 version, right? So we don't know what's on in the film. Even though I mentioned earlier that Gore Vidal hated the original and would hate this as well, because of the gaudy, over-the-top set design and coloration and theme. That just wasn't what he had in mind. But the intent, the overriding intent, was to go back to the content and the narrative drive of the Gore Vidal script, of the storyline that he was trying to express. And so that's kind of that's the North Star, right? And I think if we had a means to contact him in his grave, he would just say, "Fuck you." Yeah. but that's as good as we can get.
That's the spirit of the movie. I mean, what else are you gonna get from it? Let's all hear it one more time for Tim.
Tell your friends, bring your mom.
Great date night movie.
Thanks.